Welcome to the Kaleidoscope of Possibilities, Alternative Perspectives on Mental Health. My name is Dr. Adriana Popescu. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and leader in the field of mental health, energy psychology, addiction, trauma, and empowerment. In this podcast, we will be exploring mental health from a variety of perspectives, from the spiritual to the shamanic and beyond. What if mental illness isn't everything we think it is? What if everything we see as a pathology is actually a possibility? What else is possible with mental health? All right. Hi, everyone. Dr. Adriana Popescu here with you again today with another episode of Kaleidoscope of Possibilities, Alternative Perspectives on Mental Health. I'm really excited for our conversation today. I have as my guest Brian Hyman. He is a yoga and meditation teacher, author, recovery activist, and father. He is a member of the International Association of Yoga Therapists. He's created 10 audio courses on Insight Timer. Love that app. Also, a video course on Udemy for thousands of students around the world. Brian has been sober since 2009, and since 2012, he's been teaching yoga and meditation at Cliffside Malibu in Southern California. His dedicated work in the field of addiction treatment and recovery combines yoga, mindfulness, and spirituality. His innovative teachings about healing and transformation have been featured in interviews and articles within many publications and podcasts like this one. So we're super excited to have you with us today, Brian. Welcome.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm excited to be here. Thank you for doing this podcast and for having me.
Yeah, love it. Well, on the podcast, we love to explore what I would call more holistic modalities and approaches to healing from any kind of condition, from just healing from this being in this reality, really. But I mean, particularly for those who struggle with what we might call mental health issues, which, I see as physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. And I think you do too. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say on all of that. But as always, we always like to start the show with hearing a little bit about our guest, your background, maybe a bit about your story and how you came to be doing this wonderful work that you're doing today.
Oh, sure. So I have, as you mentioned in the intro, I've been sober since 2009, so almost 15 years now. And that was never, if you ask a kid, what do you want to be when you grow up? I've yet to hear a kid say, I want to be an alcoholic or I want to be in recovery. So it wasn't part of my master plan when I was a kid. I wanted to be a superhero, to be exact.
Yes.
Superman, Spider-Man. I wanted to be able to have superpowers and to save people and to be a hero, and I was always attracted to those things. Anyway, life had a different plan for me. Um, I won't give too much of the details or too much of the history, but I realized I had a problem with alcohol. My thing was alcohol drinking personally. It was just really, it was readily accessible. It was easy to get my hands on, and I seemed to like the taste of it, and it did the trick, which was around my teenage years, I would just drink, and it would just take the edge off. I didn't know that's what I was doing at the time with the processing and the therapy and the 12-step work and everything I've done to find my recovery. I realized that's what I was doing was, I had some issues. I didn't know what they were, and alcohol seemed to just numb that, calm that down, and just put sort of a band-aid over those things, whether it was depression or anxiety or stress or fear. I would take a few drinks and everything would be okay. So I used that as a coping mechanism, as a defense mechanism against life, against people, against relationships, against, well, you name it. Just a way to just deal with life in general, life on life's terms. And I got away with that, meaning I could still go to school, still go to work, still be in relationships, still do whatever seemed normal on the outside. But it started to take a turn, for, as it does for most of us, where I started to not care as much about life or family or friends or responsibilities or my commitments. And I was still hanging on, still doing the bare minimum in life to just get by. And I got used to that. And that's where my self-esteem started to really, really diminish, my self-confidence, my self-worth, because when you're doing the bare minimum, how else can you feel about yourself? But very low, low self-worth. And I got to where, like I said, I still had jobs and still was working and still doing things that seemingly normal people do in a seemingly normal world. But what happened was, inside I was just dying. There's a saying in recovery where we're spiritually bankrupt, we're morally bankrupt, emotionally, mentally exhausted, and just depleted. And that's where I was. And again, I didn't know that's what was happening at the time, but later I realized that's where it was. I was just void. There was nothing going on inside, and I don't know how I got there, which was sad. It just sort of catches up to you after years of doing that. And for me, what happened was, my mother, she got sick and she had cancer. And she had just a little bit of time that the doctors had given her where she was going to survive. Unfortunately, it was a terminal cancer. She wasn't going to survive. And this really woke me up. I was able to be with her near the end of her life, and I even was able to hold her hand. And so in my hand, I had life, and then I had death. And this really had a huge impact on me and the way I looked at life, meaning I was living life like, yeah, who cares? Whatever. I'll drink. If I die, I die. If whatever happens, happens. If I get a job, if I lose a job, if I have money, if I don't have money. I was so glib. I was so cynical. I was very sarcastic. I just didn't care much about anything. And this was the catalyst where literally I had life and death in my hand. And I really saw that as a chance to not only honor my mother's memory, to honor the life of anyone who wants to live and can't. I actually had the miracle, the gift of life, and I was taking it for granted. And that was the beginning of my journey was if life is precious, which was my realization in that moment, life is precious. It's a miracle. What am I going to do with it? And so it was busy to do, it was time to get busy and do something with my life. So I got to a place where alcoholics gather to share their experience, strength, and hope. I found some other people who dealt with the things that I needed to deal with, and they had overcome the things that I was hoping to overcome. I asked them how they did it. They helped me, and they saved my life. The people that helped me, people in the rooms, 12-step recovery, and my sponsor who walked me through the steps, the therapist that I had at the time, even the authors, the books that I was reading at the time, all this stuff, it truly saved my life. Not only saved my life, but really steered my life in a whole other direction. And that leads me to where I am today. I wasn't supposed to be a yoga teacher. I was supposed to be a father. I have a 9-year-old daughter at home. I wasn't supposed to work in treatment. Not if things kept going the way they were going. So I'm blessed, and there's many of us out in the world who have these moments, and the stories they're different. They change. The details are different. For me, that's just kind of the gist of my story, and it took loss and grief and sadness and a real awakening to my own the fragility of life. I just really in that moment realized like life is short. Do something with it. Get up, get out there, and just do something with your life, and just start. Just move. Take some action. Get out there, and yeah, I got sober and then became a yoga teacher. Learned learned all the things that we learned in recovery, spiritual life, mindfulness, and um, started to really walk the path. And it's neat because in recovery, I don't know if there's any way to do it halfway. We're taught many times that half measures avail us nothing, and we need to do everything, as much as we can to the best of our ability. And I did that, and it really did work for me.
Mhm. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And the phrase that came to mind when you were talking about sort of that emptiness inside and what you went through before you got sober, in spiritual terms we might call that a dark night of the soul.
Yeah, yeah, you'll see that in yoga philosophy and Buddhist psychology, this in the Bible and in Christian groups and different. It's neat because yeah, there was just this void, this emptiness, and I didn't have the words for it. I didn't know what was going on. Later on, I realized it was depression, it was sadness, it was a feeling of just not belonging. It was a lack of connection with my true self and my authenticity, and all this stuff created that black void hole, that dark night where um, it's neat because I am grateful for it, which some sometimes I'll share that with patients where I work at a treatment center, and I'll say, "Well, hang on," because they get a weird look on their face when I say I'm grateful that I am a recovered alcoholic. They'll say, "That's you really? You're grateful that you have this disease or this problem?" And I'll say, "Well, it led me here, and I'm at the happiest the person I've ever been. I'm calm, I'm at peace, I have freedom. If that's what it took to get me here." And these aren't just fleeting things. This is a lasting state that many of us get to live in recovery is we get to be at peace for most of our day. We get to have freedom for most of our days, one day at a time. We get to live. So if that's what it took, then okay, yeah, it was then I had to walk through that dark night of the soul, and I'm just grateful I came out the other side.
Yes. Yes. And I think many of us, whatever, whether it's addiction, for me, it was health issues. I became really, really sick. And that's what put me on a spiritual journey. I realized I was going, it was despair and depression and all the things. It had a different flavor, but same thing. I wouldn't, 20 years of being horribly ill, but I wouldn't trade it for anything because it got me to here where I am today. And I'm happier and healthier than I've ever been. And I discovered all these amazing modalities, yoga being one of them. I was actually a grad student. I was telling you before, we had a year of yoga when I was in grad school. It was a required class. And I would be so sick. I sometimes couldn't even stand, like, moving my body and getting into the different poses. And yet there was peace and serenity in those moments when I could just like be present with my body. And I wouldn't trade any of that, suffering. I feel like I had to go through it to get to this. Many people, I think, relate to that.
Yeah, unfortunately or fortunately, it usually takes some sort of major life event or trauma or something to make us look at life in a different way. Our perspective or our perception changes, and that's what I got a chance to do was to look into that, crystal ball, whatever you want to call it, where I had a chance. I did sort of glimpse my future, near the end of my drinking was, you're not going to last long. And I really thought I was going to not wake up one morning because I would drink so much the night before that I would just pass out and I would and I like I mentioned, to come out the other side of that, it really is almost a miracle. Because most of us, and when we're sick, whatever it is, whether it could be food, it could be gambling, it could be sex, it could be alcohol, it could be drugs. There's so many mental health issues. We have so many different things that can lead us to a dark place where we feel there's no hope, there's despair, there's no way out. And uh, it's an incredible thing to just hang in there, to hold on long enough to make it out of that. And I don't think anything makes it any more believable when you work in treatment or try to help somebody else when you've been there. They're going to believe you, and your message will carry depth and weight because I would believe you. If you said I was suicidal, I was depressed, but I'm happy today, I'm at peace today, I would say, How? Could you please tell me?" And I'd be more than happy to tell someone because I would have given everything to get that kind of advice when I was younger. I didn't have that many role models or people. I had no, back to the idea of spirituality. I didn't know what that was when I was a teenager in my 20s. So I didn't have a mentor, a guru, or a spiritual advisor. This was all stuff I learned in my recovery. So I would have loved for someone to come and hand me some of these things when I needed it most.
So, Brian, if somebody were to ask you, or when a client asks, what exactly is spirituality, what do you tell them?
That's an incredible question. My experience was, I thought it was religion. That's what I thought spirituality was when I was getting sober. I didn't know there was a difference. I didn't know what either word meant, to be honest. I knew what religion was based on past experience as a kid, as most people do. I think we can have a bias. We can have a wrong perception based on old ideas. Maybe we went to a church, a synagogue, a mosque, a temple, and we didn't like it when we were 5 or 6 or 10 years old, and that's our idea of religion when we're in our teens or 20s. So I thought spirituality had something to do with that, and I thought it had to do with being very pious, being very devotional, and getting on your knees and putting your hands together in prayer. And then I soon realized part of the path in 12-step philosophy, 12-step recovery, is it's the suggestion is to find a higher power of your own understanding. It's a spiritual program we're taught, and that really opened the door for me. The idea that it could be whatever I want it to be. Is that really what you're saying? Seriously, no one's gonna come knock on my door and tell me I can't do it this way? And you have this freedom. Go ahead and pick the ocean as a higher power. Go ahead and look up at the sun, look up at the stars, marvel at the mystery of the universe. Let that be your spiritual perspective for today. So I started to stutter step my way into spirituality, meaning for me it was nature, it was my mother's spirit, it was the idea of a heaven, maybe somewhere where there are angels, and nobody was telling me I couldn't do that. So it really gave me this creative license, this freedom to say, all right, so what if it's maybe it is Jesus? Let me read some of those books. Well, maybe it is Buddha. Let me read some of those books. Maybe it's more the yoga stuff. There's a lot of philosophy there. Let me read the Upanishads, or how about the Bhagavad Gita? And I started finding little bits and pieces where I really started to cobble together my own conception of a higher power and my own idea of spirituality. So any kind of answer I would give to somebody asking at a treatment center would be along those lines, which is whatever you want it to be, whatever it means for you today, maybe something that helps you connect to your highest self, that helps you come home to yourself, just something that helps you find a way to be at peace with yourself today, something that helps you quiet your mind today, something that gives you a feeling of equanimity or calm today. And then explore that, and you'll find it. And it's neat because for me, that has nothing to do with religion. That has everything to do with being very present, very mindful, very aware, and very connected, which is what yoga means. Yeah, very connected to nature and the elements, and um, looking at a tree, it can be a very spiritual moment, especially if you really stop and we're not looking at our phones or any other devices, or we're not listening to a radio or whatever might be distracting. And we really, we took a moment to just look at a leaf, that could be a deeply spiritual moment. I've had moments in my recovery where I've done workshops. I've taken workshops as a student and later led things like this because they were so powerful. Where I was asked to look at a tree or look at a leaf or look at a sunrise, and I would get tears in my eyes because when you really stop to marvel at that mystery, that's what. So, a long answer to these are some of the things that I feel that's a spiritual experience. If you become emotional, if you begin to weep because you believe that the colors in the sunset are so beautiful, that's a spiritual moment. That's no thing to just toss away as just, oh, just another sunset. That's our conditioning. And we try to get away from it.
Well, I think we get, like you said, even in your own story, we get complacent, we get cynical, we look at the state of affairs in the world, and the I've always said it's not like, it's not this planet that sucks. It's generally the people in it that we struggle with. The planet itself is beautiful. It's amazing. It's such a gift and a privilege to be here, but we lose sight of that because we have so many difficult experiences with the human aspect of it oftentimes.
Yeah, you actually just reminded me of something. I'm reading a book right now by Charlotte Joko Beck. She was a Zen teacher. It's called Ordinary Wonder, if I'm not mistaken. And just today I read something, and it really it speaks to exactly what you talked about. She says something like, many of us are trying to switch from being self-centered to other-centered, which is actually a great thing. The idea that we're not going to be so self-involved or self-obsessed, we're going to think about others. But she said, let's actually do this instead. Instead of being self-centered and moving to other-centered, how about life-centered? And that way you don't even have to deal with the other person or these human foibles and troubles, and why don't we just think about what's best for life in general? And it blew my mind. I read that this morning because I've been working toward that for many years. Just be less me, more you. Let me see how can I be of service to you today? And what she's saying is let's actually take it a step further. How can you be of service to the cosmos, the universe, all of life, nature?
Right. Well, and that's the connection, right? Because we all are part of it. It's all oneness. And I think what happens for folks with addiction or the dark night of the soul or whatever we want to call it, those darker experiences, is we get disconnected, right? And we are sort of, we might be on a pity pot, or we might just be really isolated, physically isolated, emotionally isolated, disconnected from ourselves, like We both share a knowledge and an appreciation for the conscious recovery, TJ Woodward's wonderful book and program that your program uses. We use it at my program as well. I'm involved with the creation of some of that. And it in that we talk about how spiritual disconnection is a root cause of addiction. And I think so many people in the sort of general public don't understand that. They think addiction's a disease. They've heard that idea. They've heard it's genetically, you're more likely to pick it up from your family. But really, what, the founders of AA knew is they called it a spiritual malady, right? So can you say, a little bit more about that and help us understand the scope of like how addiction and recovery is a spiritual issue?
Yeah, when I drank near the end, I drank alone. It was isolating and it was by design. I didn't want to listen to anybody. I didn't want to talk to anybody. I didn't want anyone to see me. I didn't want to see anybody. So there was this literally isolation was self-imposed. That was the plan. With that comes detachment. So I don't have any connection. The phone is off, the door is closed, the windows are shut. I'm trapped. I'm trapped in this cycle of isolation and misery and suffering, and it just keeps going and going. And there's nowhere for anything to change unless I'm willing to open a window, open a door, invite somebody in, talk to somebody else. That's the spiritual piece. So most of us drink, use, do our things in isolation until we find a way to start to talk about our depression or our trauma or what's happened to us or what we're going through. And unfortunately, it's a sad thing that we feel we have to do that. I don't know if it's culture or society or it's just embarrassment and shame that we feel a lot of us need to hold on to it, that um, we're afraid to ask for help. We don't know how to ask for help. We don't know what help looks like. This is all the opposite of spirituality. It's not a spiritual type of thing to stay in misery. That's the opposite of spirituality. That's a black hole. That's that dark night that we talked about. So the spiritual piece is the community. It's the fellowship. It's the unity. It's the connectivity. Um, that's where we get to talk. Like even this experience where if I was just in my house by myself, these ideas, they would just be it would just be me talking to myself. But the fact that we're having a dialogue, we're co-creating this space, and people can listen to this. This gets to be this spiritual discourse where everyone can take the pieces that work for them, leave the rest, and personalize the things that work for them, and take it into their practice, into their recovery. I don't think it's a smart idea to deny our spiritual nature. I tried that. It doesn't work. It didn't work for me. To think that we're just human, just physical, or even just mental and emotional without the spiritual piece, we're missing, I think, the most important piece because I can get physically sober. I can physically put a bottle out of the way. I can physically throw all the bottles in the trash. So physically, I can find my physical sobriety. Emotional sobriety is a different story. Maybe I can go to therapy, read some books. Maybe I can find that. Mentally, maybe I can go to therapy and do some journaling and find some sort of sobriety or balance there. The spiritual piece, that's the glue that's going to hold all those together. You're not going to be able to keep any of the other things I just talked about. You won't be able to stay emotionally sober without the spiritual element, which is going to sustain and support. It's going to uphold all of those things. Physically, you could be the strongest person in the world. Let's say you get sick or you're hit by a car. It's your faith, it's your spirituality. It's going to keep you hopeful and calm when you need to go to the doctor or need to talk about life insurance or funeral arrangements, whatever's going on. That's where the spiritual piece kicks in. It really is the glue that holds so many things together. I'll share one last thing. There was a friend of mine after I got sober for a few years. He had also tried to get sober before I did, And then while I was getting sober, and we happened to talk one time on the phone. I may have shared this story once or twice recently, but he had said, "You're lucky. You got it." And I didn't know what he meant. So I asked, "What do you mean?" He goes, "You got the one part I couldn't get." I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "The spiritual part." He said, "It sounds like you got it." He said, "That's the one thing I'm missing, and I think that's why I can't get sober."
Mm,
And that
yes.
really, really struck me because I knew he had been to a few treatment centers, and I knew he really tried, and it really made a mark on me. It really stayed with me that was the piece that was missing for him, was he couldn't figure out how to, as some people would say, get out of his own way or let go of the ego or the pride or the intellectual pride that was keeping him from believing in something that could be, usually is, unseen, unexplainable. How do you explain God or the universe or nature or spirit, and still and be able to have faith in that thing that you can hardly encapsulate or articulate? It's a huge ask for someone who's, addicted or depressed, to say, "Would you be willing to be spiritual?" What do you mean? I don't know. Would you just be willing to just, really be devoted to a prayer life? Prayer life? Are you kidding me? You know how
Right.
depressed I am? It's a huge ask, but that's the leap of faith, literally, that we take, which is, all right, I'll go ahead and just start praying or meditating. I'll see what happens. I guarantee, what happens will blow your mind.
Yeah. And it is hard. It is hard for many people. And I really try to validate that for them. A lot of the folks that come into these treatment centers that we work at, they really are struggling. And so many of them have experienced like religious negative experiences with organized religion or even trauma. We know a lot of people have trauma related to that world. And then they kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? They sort of have equated spirituality with religion, with bad things and bad people, and all of it goes out the window. And for those folks in particular, it can be really difficult to even broach the questions you're posing, because they're so shut down to that.
Yeah, I heard somebody say this once at a 12-step meeting, that the word ritual is inside the word spiritual. So anything that can be ritualistic or a positive ritual, a good habit that's for you, that can be literally within your spiritual practice. And that really made sense to me, that if somebody, let's say, does gardening each morning, if that's their ritual, then that is their spiritual practice. And and no one can tell them they're wrong or they're doing it wrong or it's not right, because it is a very individual, personal thing. So I love that idea that, especially with patients at a treatment center or anyone in general who just has a sort of aversion to spiritual life, the uh, the cheat or the life hack, as we call it these days, is make it up. Go do some gardening. Call that your spiritual practice, and that works here.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, it is, and usually the thing about it is it's peaceful, it's quiet, it's calming and soothing, and that is, those are elements of spirituality. It's being at peace, like you said in the beginning, being like in the moment, right here, right now, not your mind is back over there, or all over the place. That's and that is a spiritual experience for me. Like some of the most spiritual moments are like laying on the ocean, a quiet, peaceful ocean, and just feeling the sun beaming down on me while the water is underneath me, like I'm floating on it. And it's like, it's the closest to oneness, that I've experienced in just those pure moments of presence. That is spiritual. The cuddling your kitty cat or doggy, and having a loving moment with them or with a person, that is spiritual. So many things. I do want to shift gears a little bit and talk about yoga now. A lot of people don't think of yoga as a spiritual practice, and yet its tradition is in thousands of years of spiritual practice. So can you educate us a little bit about how yoga is more than just a class you take at the gym?
Right, and this one I also learned the hard way by thinking, as you mentioned, I thought it was just a class at the gym. I thought it was stretching, and then I got sober, and a couple months into my sobriety, I was practicing yoga, and I was hearing everything differently. What had happened was my mind had cleared up a bit because I wasn't poisoning myself, and I was in a different place mentally, and I was starting to get well. And so my yoga practice all of a sudden became a lot more than just a physical class at the gym where I was stretching. So I started hearing what the teachers were talking about and started also experiencing within my body at a somatic level. I started feeling that there were things being relieved, released, healed, transformed, and I wasn't sure how to explain it, but for example, I was in child's pose and I started to get very emotional one day in child's pose. And I realized that what was happening, I was thinking about my mother. And as I mentioned earlier, she had passed away. When she passed away, I was not yet sober, so I didn't know what to do with emotions or feelings, and I never really processed that huge loss. So here I was in child's pose a few months into my sobriety as a child, now an adult man, but still a child who lost his mother. I started to weep. I really got emotional in child's pose, and I realized that these are a lot more than just physical postures to contort our bodies into. This is not a game of Twister. So the poses are structured in ways that are meant to open lines of energy within the body to help you start to feel things at a very visceral, palpable level, and to connect your emotional life and the mental life with the physical life, and as I mentioned, and the spiritual will hold all that together. So I started to realize that this goes well beyond getting into handstand or getting into warrior two, which are both great poses, but if you can't do something with those off the mat in the world, then they are just exercise in most cases. So a lot of the poses that we do, the ones that I would teach, since we're talking about recovery and addiction, when I teach, where I teach now in a treatment center, I focus on specific areas of the body where a lot of those who have suffered from addiction and trauma related issues we store our emotions and feelings. So for example, on the shoulders, well, this is most people, stress, weight of the world, burdens, responsibilities. So we'll do shoulder openers and we'll do things to relax our shoulders, to physically relax, but also with awareness of what we're actually storing in that area, we lighten our load. Not just physically, but mentally. All of a sudden, and you'll see it. You see people, their shoulders drop, and all of a sudden, they literally are letting go and right before your eyes. It's incredible. Across the heart space, we store sadness, loss, grief, depression. So we'll do things that'll open up the chest area to expand across the collarbones to literally open the heart. And what's in the heart space is things like love, compassion, understanding, mercy, grace, forgiveness. It's hard to get to those things when all the other stuff is covering it. If you got a bunch of sadness and loss and depression right in front of your love, it's going to be hard to give your full love to somebody until you work on healing and transforming those other things that are actually holding you back. We say often our light shine, let your light shine. It's hard to let a light shine when there's something covering it. So we want to lead with the heart. We have to clear that area. In the core issue, stomach, this one's actually pretty interesting because we can think about this. We can literally make ourselves sick to our stomach when we're anxious, when we have fears, when we can't control things. These are some of the main things in the core area. You can get an ulcer, you can get diarrhea, you can get vomiting issues, nausea, literally making yourself so sick you can, or you can get into that area with your awareness of what's in there and do a little bit of core work and just start to let go of some of those things. Two more areas that are really specific to people in recovery are in the hips. So you'll hear often in yoga classes, and the hips are, this is an emotional storehouse, almost a hurt locker. It's where most of the stuff goes that we don't want to ever look at, talk about, think about ever again. It's the things like abandonment issues, rejection, betrayal, sexual trauma. When you hold a hip opener and you open your hips, a lot of this stuff starts to come out. That's what was coming out for me in the child's pose. My hips were starting to open. We get to heal these things, and you don't have to walk around with your hips locked up and walking in painful ways. The last area, the lower back area, is where most of us store anger, resentments, grudges, grievances, things we can't forgive. It's no wonder lots of us have lower back issues. I'm not saying it's all emotional. Definitely people have physical issues. I have degenerated discs in my lower back, so I'm not saying this is all emotional stuff. Physicality, we all have different things to work on as well, but a lot of it is emotional. And the way yoga looks at the body is not from just a physical. It takes into account the whole person, which is the physical, the emotional, the mental, the spiritual. It all goes together.
Yes. So important. And I think I really appreciate that you're like adding depth to this, because I think so many people sort of in this day and age see yoga as sort of like this two-dimensional thing. I do it, yeah, for my physical fitness, but they don't understand like the profound depth that it has. And the other piece, like I was thinking when you were talking about a woman who said to me at the rehab just in the last week, that she didn't even realize how much trauma, because people, I want to talk about trauma in yoga for a minute, because so many people have experienced, really difficult life experiences, but a lot of times they brush them off, right? Like, oh, well, whatever, that happened. Yeah, it sucked, but get over it. Or, other people have had it way worse than me. What I went through wasn't that bad. And this woman was talking about how she didn't understand the scope of the trauma she had been through until she started doing yoga. And similar to you, she became very emotional. She was very numb and shut down, right? So we know one of the symptoms of PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder, is that numbing or avoiding. And she had been very much in that space. She didn't even realize that she had repressed so much material and it was all locked in her body. And she started doing the yoga and it just came pouring out of her. And she was just overwhelmed with emotion. And but she looked back on it as a gift. Like, I had no idea until I started doing yoga that I even was carrying all this trauma. So can you speak to that a little bit? What is happening when we're doing yoga for people who have trauma in the body?
Yeah, I feel most of us, when bad things happen, when terrible things happen, traumatic things happen, mentally, most people don't want to think about it. So mentally, we block it out. We go somewhere mentally. We we're not going to talk about that. We're not going to think about it. But unfortunately, nobody tells the body. The body is going to store that somewhere. It's not just going anywhere just because we don't want to think about it or talk about it doesn't mean it's not it just disappears completely. It's going to come up. Whatever's not dealt with will come up. There's a saying, um, I can't think of it right now, but the idea is the more you push something away, the more it's going to come back. There's no, at some point, the delay,
What you
you're going to have to
resist
deal with.
persists, maybe
That's it.
something
Yeah.
like that. Yeah.
That's it. Yeah. What you resist persists. That's exactly what I was thinking of. And this idea, and that's what we'll do mentally with trauma. And the body's very patient. The body will hold on to something for years, decades in some cases, until we're finally ready to deal with it. And I don't know if we can fully heal 100% until we heal at all those levels. And so some of us do have to revisit some things and think about some things and even talk about some things. And I feel in my experience, it's been part of the process. I've witnessed people do it where, let's face it, it's the last thing somebody wants to think about or talk about again if they've gone through something traumatic. Um, but I feel it's necessary for you to bring these pieces together. It has to come out of the body. Um, I've seen people walk around, with their shoulders up or one shoulder up or walk with a limp or, just have a bad back. I just have a bad back. I've heard people say that. And you start to ask them, well, do you have an MRI? Do you have some x-rays? What's actually going on? Do you know where it is? Oh, it's always been like that. And you start to really get to the heart of the matter. I was thinking of somebody specific who was telling me they had a bad back. That was just something they were telling themselves. They didn't have to actually talk about or any details of what was really going on. What finally came out was this person had some things that made them very resentful, very angry. And that's what I mentioned earlier is that's one of the areas, the lower back is where we'll store those resentments. So it wasn't so much a physical thing because there were never any x-rays or any, but it was more of an emotional thing where you can imagine if someone is really angry, they make a fist. And this is what happens in a lot of the parts of the body where everything knots up, it tightens up, and it'll stay like that. And it's easier just to not think about it. And even in some cases say, oh yeah, I just have a bad back. I just been working too much, or it's the way I sit in my chair. Or you may want to consider actually looking at some of these areas. There's some things you haven't forgiven, some things you need to talk about, some things you need to process, some things that need to be healed or transformed. The way we talk about this sometimes, it almost seems like it's so intense. It's actually not that intense. it meaning we don't have to go looking for these things. So I don't go to a yoga class as a student thinking, today I'm going to heal my childhood trauma once and for all. Today will be the day I finally let go of when that kid called me a name when I was 12 and he embarrassed me. What happens is you start to move and your body tells you what it's time. And your body is very kind, meaning it will never give you something that you cannot handle yet you're not ready for. So when I got into that child's pose and started to cry, I was ready for that. It wasn't too overwhelming. It wasn't too much. It was actually very it was a beautiful moment where I was just able to release something I didn't even know I needed to release until it was actually happening. So it was very interesting that I promise if somebody is hesitant to try yoga because they don't want to feel, um, I don't think anything would come too fast or too intense. I've seen it too many times. I've taught thousands of classes for almost 15 years. I've never seen somebody have to get up and walk away because they were feeling too much. It doesn't happen that way. Um, your practice is it's like a good friend, and it would only give you the proper dose of medicine. It would only give you the exact amount of whatever it is you need that would help you heal exactly what it is you need to heal, even if you don't even know what that is yet, which is really strange because it still happens to me where I'll do something in a practice. And my practice, as we talked earlier, is more restorative, more gentle, more yin. Um, and I'll be in happy baby pose, and all of a sudden I have a thought about something that happened when I was a kid, or maybe something I need to do to help my daughter with her schoolwork. And I realized that was beautiful. I had no idea. Like, that wasn't the reason I got onto the mat. That's not why I had planned to practice yoga. So a lot of this stuff, this emotional healing that we're talking about, I don't think we can plan it. I think it's more of just suiting up and showing up, take your ride on your magic carpet, get on your yoga mat, and just let the process spiritually unfold. So back to spirituality, this is a great example of spiritual unfoldment. That's an example of a spiritual awakening is, I don't know, I went to my yoga class and all of a sudden I was able to heal my childhood trauma. Yeah, that's a spiritual experience.
Yes, it is. Very
That's what
much.
happened. And that's what's beautiful is, it'll happen, and I'm glad it happens piecemeal like that because if some practice like yoga were to try to heal your entire life story in 1 hour, that would be, I mean, your head would explode, it's way too much. So practice, so it's gradual. As your practice deepens and develops, you'll start to find your healing also progresses and develops and deepens, and yeah, there's a lot more to yoga than just the physical poses. I've moved a lot more into the, the philosophy and the spiritual pieces and how to. If we are going to use the physical, I try to do it in a way that let's make it more about just getting six pack abs and lean meat, cut defined shoulders and biceps. Let's actually try to let's try to heal some things while we're at it.
Yes, exactly. Now, you've written about all these things in your book. Tell us about that.
The book is called Recovery with Yoga: Supportive Practices for Transcending Addiction, and it's based on 30 principles. So they're manageable, meaning that they're universal or timeless principles. Some would even say spiritual principles. For example, chapter one is honesty. We can all meet there at honesty. You know, if someone were to ask you, is there something you can be honest about today? Most people would be able to answer that question. So we'll meet there at honesty, and then the book and the questions and the practices will actually meet each reader or student exactly where they are. So it's a blend of yoga philosophy and practices, some secular practices as well. So things that are mindfulness based. So there should be something in here for everybody. This is based on about 12 years worth of working at a treatment center and my own personal recovery and hopefully giving you the things that really seem to work for most people and not try to give you anything other than what I've actually personally seen work within my own life and the lives of many clients that I've worked with. And again, it's about things like humility, commitment, willingness, presence. I'm just flipping through now. Passion, punctuality, perseverance, accountability, consistency. So these are all things we can work on at some level. And no matter where you are, which is neat, I've heard from the book's been out about 3 months. So I've heard from people who are brand new to recovery and they're getting something from it. And then I've heard from people who have decades of recovery and they're getting something from it. And I think that's neat. Yeah, one of the reasons I stuck with just the principles instead of trying to make it Brian Hyman's program for addiction recovery, it has it, this is nobody can deny the timelessness of a principle that no matter what angle you're coming at it from, it's just a principle. Love, for example, is love. So whether Jesus talked about love or the Buddha or Krishna, or love is love. So we can just talk about love, and that's not one of the principles in this book. That'll be in the sequel.
Ah, yes. I love it. And what a gift. Thank you. Because I've written books as well. It is not easy. It is not an easy task to put a book together, and for you to take the time and the energy to do that, to contribute that gift to the world, truly is a gift. So thank you for that. And if people want to find out more about the book or about you and your work, where can they go?
My website is brianhymanyoga.com, and that'll lead you to all the different places where I have some content on Insight Timer, the meditation app. I have courses and guided meditations. And on my site, there's lots of articles and podcasts and things like that. Most of it's free. People can read those things and listen to those things.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for being on the show today. I've loved our conversation and the depth that we've brought to this topic and the importance of this topic for those recovering. But all of us are in recovery from something in this world. What an important piece this is, I think, to our own healing and living, truly living our lives. Any final thoughts you have for us?
Yes, for anyone who thinks that yoga's not for them, that's okay. Um, I didn't think it was for me either. Like I mentioned, I thought it was just stretching. And for anyone who thinks that they're not ready for recovery, that's okay, if that's where you're at. So there's one of the reasons I've done a lot of these uh, podcasts and interviews and articles is to hopefully try to reduce any kind of shame or stigma around the idea that someone may have a problem with alcohol or drugs or a sex addiction or a money issue or a food issue or whatever the thing is, or if someone's suffering from depression or mental health issues, just to let people know that it's okay. Wherever you are, it's okay. And there's hope. And there's probably within reach, there's probably someone you can talk to. There's probably somewhere you can go to get help when you're ready, if you're ready, and there's no need to be embarrassed. I think that's what kept me from trying to get help when it was time for me to get help. I thought people were going to think I was a loser, that I failed at life, I thought that what I felt about myself on the inside, people were going to think that about me, and it was the exact opposite. I felt I was worthless before I got sober, and I thought the whole world already saw me that way, and that was all in my mind. It was all in my head. There was none of that was there. As soon as I reached out for help, help was there. So many people were willing to help me, and it was just an incredible feeling to know that I was wrong, that I was wrong about the whole thing. So just to let anyone know who's out there thinking, that maybe all these ideas about spirituality and yoga and recovery, there's room for everybody, and if you need help, please ask for it wherever you are. Um, there's so many people, there's so many of us who have found recovery, myself included, where I'm pretty sure if you reached out on our website or social media, we'll probably get back to you and try to help you as best as we can.
Thank you so much for that. And thank you all for tuning in and being with me and Brian today. If you've liked this podcast, please do share, comment, like, follow, subscribe, review, all the things that will make those algorithms get this information out there in the hands of more people who are seeking and who need this info. Thank you so much, everyone. See you next time. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Kaleidoscope of Possibilities, Alternative Perspectives on Mental Health. This has been Dr. Adriana Popescu. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe and share with others. To find out more about me, my guests, and more, please visit my website at adrianapopescu.org.
See you next time.